Greetings everybody, welcome to your video series on an introduction to sociology. The topic for this video, deviance and social control. So let's get started. What do we mean by deviance? Deviance is defined as a violation of an established cultural norm. If you remember from an earlier video, norms are expected or accepted forms of behavior. And deviance is really also in context with time and place, meaning what was once deviant in the past may not be deviant today, and what was not deviant in the past may actually be considered deviant today. And we'll talk about some examples. And we also want to keep in mind place. What is deviant behavior in one place may not be considered deviant in another place. And the last thing we want to keep in mind when we talk about deviance is that deviance is a social construct. What do we mean by social construct? In sociology, the idea of a social construct means that humans have created it. There is nothing necessarily biological about this particular kind of behavior. It is seen or labeled or constructed as bad or good. So in the case of deviance, for example, let's look at speed limits. If the speed limit out on the interstate is 65, how fast are you going? 85? 90 or higher? Would you agree that most people are probably traveling somewhere in the vicinity of 70 to 74 miles per hour? That would establish this as the norm. This is what is expected. It's still violating the law if the law is 65, but most people are not going the exact speed limit. Most of us, not all of us, but most of us are going a bit faster. And we sort of have it in our heads that 5 miles over, not that big of a deal. The police officer is probably not going to worry so much about giving us a ticket. But once we hit that 9-10 miles or higher, then we know we can expect to get pulled over if a police officer was to see us. What about this person driving 55, creating all kinds of road rage from the rest of us? So who's deviant here and who's not deviant? Well, obviously the person who's going 55 is deviant. Most people are not driving 55. It is a violation of not only the law, but the established norm of 70 to 74. And people who are driving 85, 90 or higher are deviant. But guess what? The person who chooses to drive the exact same speed limit is also deviant because the rest of us are going a bit faster. So the point here is deviance isn't always everything that's violating the law. Sometimes we can follow the law and still be considered deviant, and sometimes we can break the law and still be considered in the norm or not deviant. Lately, I've been feeling lethargic, listless, and apathetic. And if I stand up too suddenly, I get dizzy. My daughter says she has to smoke 2 joints to feel like that. Now, what does this cartoon have to do with deviance? Well, if we think about time and place, drug use throughout our history as a species, throughout our culture, our understanding of drugs, our acceptance or non-acceptance of drugs continues to change a lot over time. So when I first started using this cartoon, for example, marijuana was largely illegal everywhere. And then what happened? Well, it started to become recognized as having potential medicinal benefits, and it was legalized for medicinal use in certain places over time. And then also over time and in certain places, marijuana began to become decriminalized and actually accepted and legalized for recreational use for those 21 and over, including here in New Mexico. Our neighbors up to the north in Colorado, Arizona, California, Oregon, Washington, all have legalized marijuana use for not just medicinal purposes, but also recreational purposes. And this is what we mean by social construct. So if you were smoking a joint in 1980, you would have been seen as deviant, you would be violating the law as well, and you could probably expect some kind of punishment. Fast forward to 2024, you're smoking that same joint in a state where marijuana is legalized, you are no longer seen as deviant. Now, the opposite of deviance is what we're going to call social control. Social control is society's attempt at regulating our behavior in order to control people and keep them from being deviant. Society has all kinds of ways at the macro level to try to keep everybody from being deviant and have some sense of control and order in our society. We also do this at the micro level in our families and with our friends. Parents are all about social control when they're raising their children. And so what are some examples of social control at the macro level? Well, our Justice Department, law enforcement agencies are all about social control. They're trying to keep people from getting too far out into the deviant world and trying to keep them in the acceptable norms in terms of behavior with whatever issue we might be talking about. We also use shaming as a way of trying to keep people from being deviant and controlling their behavior. We talked earlier in another video about sanctions, both formal and informal. We use sanctions as a way of trying to control people's behavior. And social media is all about social control. Whenever we give someone a thumbs up, we're telling them, hey, I like your behavior, keep it up. We give them a thumbs down or an angry emoji or a laughing emoji. What are we trying to do? We're trying to tell them, hey, you're being a fool. We don't like what you're doing. We don't like what you're saying. Cut it out. And the whole idea behind cancel culture, where celebrities or famous people are putting their foot in their mouth or they're saying things that large numbers of people reject, then what happens? There is this large social control movement that takes over, boycotts. People stop following certain people online, or they stop buying their products, or they start making fun of them. These folks then start losing their income, losing their jobs, and off into the distance they go. Perhaps a more famous example of this was the Roseanne controversy a few years ago after she rebooted her sitcom, and then she got into trouble with some things she said on Twitter, at that time Twitter, that were deemed racist, and ABC fired her and canceled the show, only to bring it back the following season without her as a cast member. So that's it for now. Thanks for checking in. Never stop learning, and remember, sociology is everywhere.